Hello!
Everybody, it's a new What We Read video where we talk about the books, graphic novels, comics, manga that we've read. Wow, yes. I get to say manga now.
That is true.
I get to say manga now.
That is true.
So this is the first one we've actually filmed in a while because real life has been pretty busy. So we're gonna get caught up on these, hopefully. So that'll be a little longer than usual, but not overly so, I hope.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna kick things off by talking about something that I meant to read right at the beginning of the year, and it took me quite some time before I finally got to it. And then when I did read it, it read so quickly for me, and that is How the King of Elfheim Learned to Hate Stories, which is by Holly Black with illustrations by Ravina Kai. This is basically a series of short bits of Cardan's life. Cardan is the sort of love interest in the Cruel Prince series by Holly Black, and you get glimpses of him as a kid, as a teen, a younger teen, and also after the events of the entire series. And I think what really makes this reading experience special is that you have all these illustrations which are super atmospheric and they add extra value to the story. Because the story itself, the memories and the moments that are highlighted here are very simple, really. There's not much to really draw you in the way that the first book and the second book of the original trilogy does, but it is a fun addition to the series, and it was nice to sort of get Cardan's point of view of a lot of what was going on, just to see what was in his head. So it was worth it for that, for sure, and for the illustrations as well. And the next thing I'm going to talk about is a light novel. This is the first one I've ever read, even though I own so many. This is Can't Fear Your Own World Volume 1. This is by Tite Kubo and Ryogo Narita, and I hope I said that right. This is clearly a Bleach light novel. So the summary for this one is, while the Quincy's thousand-year blood war is over, a new conflict is arising in the Soul Society when Tokinada Tsunayashiro decides to enact his plan to create a brand new Soul King and start a war across the realms. The writing style isn't really something that worked for me, although I am curious to see if it's just because I've never read a light novel before and I wasn't used to how there's a sort of brevity and quickness to the pace that doesn't always necessarily appeal to me. The illustrations were fun though, because they were well done, and they also featured some characters that I really adore, which was fun. I really enjoyed being reunited with characters that I love in the show. The one on the cover is actually one of my favorites. It's Hisagi, but there are a lot of other familiar faces that pop up, and I basically just lost all sense of composure every time someone showed. I was like, oh my god, they're here! And I got to find out what they were up to after the entire series had ended, and in between, like, the ending of the big arc and the epilogue that gets tacked on to the manga itself. The plot does feel like it's pulling familiar elements of other plots that have already happened in the Bleach world. And this installment is definitely just a beginning. It's volume 1 after all, and there are a lot of loose ends that need to be wrapped up, so I am curious to see if there is anything that's going to make this story, which I think is complete now, a standout, an arc that I actually really appreciate. I don't know yet. We'll have to find out. The next book that I have, well, I don't actually own these physically, but we do digitally own all of the currently out English translation of the manga for Jujutsu Kaisen. So it's volume 0 until the recently released volume 12. The first one actually is not part of the main series. So the first one, volume 0 as it's called, is actually going to be a movie that's coming out at the end of the year. This one centers around a protagonist named Yuta Okotsu, and he has a problem with a cursed spirit that won't leave him alone. And so Gojo Satoru, who is a character that does pop up in sort of the main timeline of the series, he makes an offer for Yuta to join him at Jujutsu High in order to find a way to deal with his curse, and he accepts it without understanding or realizing that he's probably going to have to confront the curse even before he might be ready to. So I really liked this volume 0, even though I think that if I had read that first before even knowing about the anime and being familiar with the world, I would have found it a little bit overwhelming because it just like dives right into the action. There's really no intro per se. Right, so you're basically just learning by the seat of your pants, and that can definitely be overwhelming, especially with a world that's kind of, if you don't know the hierarchy of it, it's a little confusing. It is an episodic volume of the manga, so it feels, it's one and done basically for that plot line, but I am sure it's going to bleed into the main storyline at some point, because I just have this feeling. I like it because it ends on a pretty solid note, and it kind of puts you right in the position for the rest of the series to start, which is great. I've actually read it twice this year because I reread it before I continued on with the series, which then follows a character named Itadori. He also ends up getting involved with the world of curses and breaking them because he eats a cursed object. And now this curse is residing in him, and so they're kind of using him as a vessel for the other parts of this curse in order to gain them, and then they're probably going to kill him after. We don't know if that's going to happen yet. And he ends up going to Jujutsu High as well, and he sort of learns about the world of curses and sorcerers. And the series is dark. First of all, it's a horror sort of shonen series, a little bit.
Definitely.
So
horror.
There's definitely a lot of graphic death and gruesome violence
yeah,
that occurs
body horror,
on the page.
Just...
Body horror, yes, absolutely. And some very sticky situations that are kind of, well, not even kind of terrible. They are actually
100%
terrible.
terrible.
But it's so compelling. It was interesting to revisit the plot parts that I had already seen animated. I had a lot of fun with that because I was like, I know what's going to happen next. And I always find it interesting to see how it's laid out in a manga panel versus like seeing it animated on screen.
Yeah.
It feels different to me. And then the manga now extends past the first season of the anime.
Yes.
And I'm just like, I'm suffering because now I have to go volume by volume, and the gap between them tends to be like a couple of months.
Pretty.
I'm suffering because this arc that we're currently in is a very stressful arc, and very stressful things are happening to people I care about.
And it's not
And it's starting to bring the big showdown of the series, which I think is going to be the ending of it, into the picture. Like, we're getting closer to that. And I can sense that while I'm reading this, so I'm a little stressed out, you know, wound up, but we're gonna
soldier on.
We're gonna soldier on because we need to know things. The last thing that I want to talk about in this section is also a manga series. I actually binge read the entirety of the Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba series, which is 23 volumes long. Luckily, by the time I read it, all 23 volumes were out, so I could read them back to back to back to back.
Wasn't that lucky?
Okay, so the basic premise of this manga series, also an anime now, if you're more into that. It's after a demon slaughters his family and leaves only his little sister Nezuko alive. She's been transformed into a demon at this point. Tanjiro Kamado sets out on a dangerous journey to become a demon slayer, to find a way to make his sister human again and to avenge his family by destroying the demon who killed them.
Right.
Basic premise of the series. There's a lot more going on under the surface, so it's very exciting. So I've been peripherally aware that this anime is very popular. Maki has actually watched it. I've seen a few of the episodes, like, just on the side there. So I kind of knew the basic premise, but I didn't anticipate how invested I would become in seeing how this all played out. Like, shonen is very hit or miss for me. Like, if I don't click with something right away, I tend to be like, okay, I'll read it at some point, but it's not, you know, gonna draw me in. And with Demon Slayer, like, from the first volume, I was like, oh no, I need to know how this is all gonna resolve itself. So it has a lot of the typical elements you might expect from something shonen. It has a main character who is determined to reach his goal, and in order to get there, he kind of has to level himself up and learn a lot of things along the way. There's a large cast of characters who transform in my eyes as we learn more about their backstories. Like, when I say large cast, I mean large cast in this one. We also have epic fight scenes that play out on the page, and I'm sure it must look stunning in the anime also. But it also surprised me because the pacing is a lot, it's more well-paced than a lot of shonen stories that I've personally encountered. Like, it's very snappy, we don't drag things out for too long. It just feels like it's moving at a clip that I personally really like. I also like that the world itself and the sort of magical aspect to it is very simple. It's easy to understand and really get into. The ending is pretty satisfying, for the main arc anyway, but there's like a part about the ending, the epilogue, where I'm kind of like, okay, I didn't really need this, but I'll accept it because, you know, they deserve it after everything they've been through. I don't think that the story is actually anything particularly new or remarkable. He just pulled elements that might be familiar from, you know, other stories or anime that you have encountered, but I personally loved it. I thought it was excellent. It's definitely a manga that I would recommend checking out, and I'm very excited to watch the anime now because I'm just like, I need to see this all like come to life on the screen because it's going to be amazing. Okay, that's the first set of things I'm going to talk about for this video. A pretty neat set.
We segue therefore into my little bit, and of the many things that I've read, Suki alone from the Avatar: The Last Airbender sort of like series, like unlike a lot of the graphic novels that sort of came out in the canon sort of like universe of Avatar, this one actually happened sort of like in between. So this is a part of the story where, not too spoilery, but one of the allies that Aang, the Avatar at the time, from the Kyoshi warriors, Suki, gets captured after the fall of Ba Sing Se and
oh yes,
Azula,
that's right.
whatever. And so it just shows how she sort of, you know, and by the time they end up rescuing her, which they did, that was, I think, Sokka and Zuko's life-altering journey. It shows you what kind of like strength of spirit Suki had and of heart that Suki had between her sort of like arrest and incarceration up to the point where her boys come for her. And I thought that was pretty cool. I wasn't expecting too much, but at the same time, I was like, I should have expected better, because it was pretty good. I liked it. It's got a lot of heart, and that's exactly why we love the Avatar: The Last Airbender universe, is because of a way it sort of makes you care for these characters, in spite of the larger looming, in this case, still the war with the Fire Nation.
Absolutely.
So that was always fun. Finally finished the Old Guard Tales Through Time sort of like series, that should come in a collected edition as well, 6 issues. Really, really fun stuff. And for those of you who have heard me rant about the Old Guard,
He's talked about it a lot.
I just love that it's about a bunch of immortals who aren't necessarily vampires or werewolves or anything grim, dark, medieval, but definitely immortal and unkillable, as far as we know. And so, so you've got these individuals who have aged over centuries and have been part of so many people's lives, and to see, sort of take a peek at what they, how they, what their lives were like all throughout. How does one conduct oneself when you know you're practically unkillable? But at the same time, sometimes immortality can be a curse. I mean, what if somebody puts you in a box and throws you over the, like...
That's true, then you can't...
You're just going to keep drowning for the next several years until the box gives out. It's not a great thing, right? So there is that danger to, there is something where there are fates far worse than death. And so to be able to capture the drama of their lives across time, such a great supplement. I still want to know what happens next, because this is technically a bunch of prequels. But,
You seem upset.
I highly recommend it, because when an elite squad of immortals gets together to shake things up, it just nothing but there can only be like awesomeness that and by awesome I don't necessarily mean like dragons in full like destructive mode can inspire awe, but that's everything's still broken. So anyway, there's that. Last but certainly not least, my X-Men, my favorite thing of all time. Reign of X volumes 2 and 3 sort of are out, and while that's fine, the lead into the Hellfire Gala, boy, so the X-Men are on the front foot. They have their own island now. It's their own. They've declared themselves
recognized by the world
a
as
country.
Country, right?
And while several things are brewing inside the island, outside the island, blah blah blah, everyone was like, "Calm down, put everything on hold, because we are inviting everyone around the world to the Hellfire Gala, which we will hold on a tiny little island. Everybody's come by invitation. Everybody's going to be dressed up in mutant chic." We're gonna reveal some things, and my god, the spoiler reveals. I was kind of like spoiled on Facebook already, which is like, whoa. But even then I was like, okay, if this is the spoiler and I dig it, how does it happen? Boy, but it happens so great. Needless to say, my favorite characters are on point and magnificent, and I did not think, just when I thought that they couldn't be any more badass, the level just gets sort of higher, and I, as an X-Men fan, cannot love this enough. So like I would just like take people on and through like a keynote speech of me just walking through some really important panels just to catch everybody up.
I bet you could do that,
because that's exactly what I did for you with the Bat Family. Like I didn't make you read like 98 comics of like Nightwing and Robin and Birds of Prey. I didn't have to give
me the highlights.
I gave you the highlights. I gave you the very heart of it, and I really feel like I'm close to doing that for you, because I don't. First of all, I don't want to use. Well, that's the other thing too.
Make a PowerPoint.
Unlike, and it's a keynote, unlike with the Bat Family, I actually like, there's so much of, it's more like 60-40. There's so much of the X-Men that is just so good. The relationships, the build-up. So highly recommend everybody to pick up Jonathan Hickman's sort of like run of the X-Men, starting from Reign of X, Powers of X, House of X, Powers of X. Just perfection and beauty and love and joy. That's me. That's my little graphic novel binge.
Okay, actually, I am going to talk about a graphic novel next, which pretty much lines up with that. This is Brightly Woven. This is the graphic novel adaptation of Alexandra Bracken's debut novel. It was adapted by Lee Dragoon, and the art was by Kit Seaton, as you can see on the cover. This came out earlier this year. So the story for this one is that there is a talented young weaver named Sidel, and she's always dreamed about life outside of her village, and she kind of ends up getting her wish granted when a mysterious young wizard named Waylon North asks her to help him prevent a war from breaking out. So I read the debut novel that inspired this, and it was really cool just getting to experience the story in a completely different medium that combines both words and visuals. It's really charming, and I love the colorful illustrations that accompany the story. I think it really suits the overall feeling of the tale and breathes some new life into it, so I think it is a very different experience from what the book is like. So once again, even though this is a solid fantasy standalone story, like it ends on a very solid note, it's a very simple setup for the story as well. I still really enjoyed experiencing it again, and I'm still kind of mad that I don't know what happens to these characters after the way this ends, so definitely check it out if you are interested in this. The next thing I got to talk about are series stuff. So first we're going to talk about 2 books from the Night Hunter series by Janine Frost. It's One Grave at a Time and Up from the Grave. I've talked about this series so many times on this channel this year, but basically it is about a half-human, half-vampire named Cat. She's determined to basically find and kill her deadbeat vampire dad, and she ends up crossing paths with a bounty hunter, a vampire bounty hunter named Bones. So these two, they felt more episodic in nature, even though there are still elements that tie them in with the previous books in the series. I think they're still enjoyable and they're still fun, but unlike the others, it feels almost like the arc is complete once the book is over. I think that there is a very strong consistency in this author's ability to just tell a story that is thrilling and entertaining and funny. She knows how to really combine romance and banter and mystery and action scenes into something really fun, and I've been really enjoying the series, for sure. I like that there is also consistency in how she writes her characters. It's just interesting to me because they grow through the series, but the core of who they are never changes, and I really love that a lot because a lot of them go through so much stuff in the series, but it's nice to see that the truest things about themselves are carried over all the way until the last book that I mentioned. I am going to mention, because I'm doing a Throne of Glass reread with my friend Danica, we're gonna have to talk about all of the Throne of Glass books that I've read at this point. So I'm gonna take a page from Mackie's book and just hold the tiny editions, because, you know, so much easier. So
they're cute.
I'm gonna mention Assassin's
I love
Blade,
these.
Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, and Heir of Fire, which is basically 4 of the books, which is basically half at this point. Okay, so we have also talked about Throne of Glass a lot on this channel, but if you don't know what the series is about, Celaena Sardothien has earned herself the moniker Adarlan's assassin, but her comfortable day-to-day life is upended when she uncovers new things and conspiracies sort of involving people in her life. And that is the Assassin's Blade. Throne of Glass is basically what happens after the events of Assassin's Blade, when Celaena finds herself being recruited by the Prince of Adarlan and his captain of the guard to compete in a competition to become the king's champion. The king's champion.
Something thereabouts.
Yes. Anyway, so it's been a hot minute since I reread the series. I think the last time was when the last book came out, which was 2018, I want to say. But settling back into it has a very familiar and cozy feeling to me, even with all the violence and the drama.
I mean,
my favorite part of rereading the series this time around has been kind of seeing all the connections up until the last book, because I've read it. Because so now I can pinpoint parts where I'm like, huh, she actually mentions this in book 1 and it doesn't come into fruition until like book 6 or whatever it is.
Agreed.
It's so interesting to me and so fascinating because it means the groundwork was already there and we just didn't know it was there, and I love how clever that is. And also, hanging out with this cast of characters feels like hanging out with old friends, some of whom I like better than others. But yeah, it's been really fun.
I'm looking at you, Sardothian.
It's been really fun to just revisit the series. I'm looking forward to reading the last 4 novels in it and then talking about it again with all of you, and with probably with Mackie and Danica on a podcast, maybe. We'll see how that goes. All right, the last thing I'm going to mention in this video is a series. Technically, the first 2 books in the series complete an arc, so you could say it's a complete series. I only own the second one physically. I don't own the first one physically for some reason, but the books are The Bridge Kingdom and The Traitor Queen, which are by Danielle L. Jensen. So the summary of this one is that our main character has been training for years to be a lethal spy. Lara finally finds herself being betrothed to the King of Ithacana, another kingdom. His name is Aaron, and her primary objective is to gather information about her new homeland to help her previous homeland conquer its defenses, and then this gets thrown into question when she realizes all that she's ever been told about her husband and his homeland is a lie.
Ah, very
So
nice.
this is a very, very hyped duology in the book community. So many people have read this and enjoyed it and loved it. And I have read another series by Danielle Jensen, and I think that the thing that remains most consistent for me is that she's a strong writer. She is really good at pulling together the construction of her world, a good cast, and a very compelling story. So her books are very infinitely readable. And it was pretty easy for me to be sympathetic to Aaron right away, but it took me longer to warm up to Lara. And I think that's just in part because of how Lara is characterized as being a bit more guarded and reticent about her own personality and desires, because she's sacrificing everything for the sake of her kingdom and her sisters. But I really enjoyed both of these characters and their dynamic as the story goes on, though I do wish I'd connected to them just a little more to make the emotional impact of whatever they go through even stronger. Of the two, I do think the second book is my favorite, just because I feel like the way the plot plays out and all the action that occurs in the second book and everything that gets revealed is just so satisfying. So I really did enjoy reading this duology, and I'm looking forward to the spin-off companion novel that is supposed to come out in the future, because it's about two characters we do meet in the series, and I'm very curious about how their story is going to turn out. And that, friends, brings us to the end of this What We Read video. We hope you enjoyed watching us talk about some of our recent-ish reads. If you have any questions about any of them, or if you just loved or disliked some of them, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And we hope you guys are doing well. We'll see you with a new video soon. Bye!